Thank you. Okay. So just really quickly, I'll do a quick introduction. My name is Christian. I'm a member of the steering committee for the Vancouver Tenants Union and one of the coordinators for the City Hall working group within the Vancouver Tenants Union. And I myself am a tenant here in Vancouver in Hastings Sunrise. And I'll just let CJ, who's going to be co-facilitating the event with me, introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Christian. Hi, everyone joining us. My name is CJ. I work with Christian and the team on the City Hall working group. And I'm super excited to see everyone here. So this is great. So thank you so much, Christian, for some
awesome. Cool. Yeah, so first of all, I just want to acknowledge that at least I think for most of us that we're organizing here today and coming together today on the stolen and occupied land of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish peoples. And certainly at the VTU, we try to understand the crisis that we're all grappling with, this crisis of affordability and for land struggle by understanding colonialism. And certainly one of its main goals has always been and continues to be to commodify land and to displace people and displace communities from each other and from land and to exploit. And we can see that up until the present. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that, and two, that we sort of highlight the very tangible violence that has occurred on these territories just in recent weeks with the violent arrests of land defenders here on these territories at the hands of the VPD. So I think these struggles are clearly very real and very much still occurring. And I think the struggle for permanent, safe, and adequate housing for all will not be achieved until this land is repatriated. So I just want to tell you quickly a bit about the VTU and then do some house rules. And then I'll let CJ talk about our agenda a little bit. So the VTU, the Vancouver Tenants Union, is a union of a bit over 2,000 tenants in Vancouver fighting for safe and affordable housing. We do this through a couple different ways. We organize buildings. COVID has obviously made that difficult, but that is sort of one of the hallmarks of our work is organizing buildings. We also advocate to different groups and to individuals. We run different campaigns, like the Real Rent Control campaign, like the campaign to try and fight against the REITs, the Real Estate Investment Trust. So we had that event about a month ago that some of you might have attended, and many more. And so sort of our core values when it comes to tenancy, when it comes to housing, is that we reject the speculative market. And so we believe that housing should be a right, a basic human right, and not a way for people to make money. And we believe that this right should be afforded to all. So in terms of house rules, please, if you could keep yourselves muted throughout the meeting, unless you're speaking, that would be really awesome. We, of course, welcome all people regardless of identities and ask that our attendees do the same. We ask and hold ourselves to these rules that we debate ideas and not people. So of course, healthy debate is part of organizing and part of like really, really important work. But please just don't debate each other's, character or people. And also when we're speaking, and we're going to try and do this ourselves too, when you're speaking, please try and break it down is what we call it. And that's essentially just asking that we keep our language accessible. And if we're using any big words or long acronyms, if you could spell those out for us, that would be much appreciated. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to CJ just to outline our agenda a little bit.
Thanks, Christian. So we're very excited for today. There's an action-packed agenda with which we hope everyone will be able to derive something of value. And so we're going to start off by welcoming Member of Parliament for the NDP for Vancouver Kingsway, Davies, who's going to chat with us. We're going to learn from the VTU team about the upcoming public hearing and how to immediately today sign up and start to continue to work toward the affordable housing and protecting rental stock. We're going to hear directly from tenants, right? This is about centering the tenants and why these protections matter and the impact that they can have. We're also, after all of that, going to have make some space for Q&A. Obviously, the chat is happening, and you're more than welcome to engage there. There'll be members of VTU and anyone sort of happy to engage there. And then after the Q&A, we're going to stick around in support, and we're making space to make sure that anyone who does feel inspired or decide they want to try their hand at speaking at the public hearing, we're going to stick around to help you prepare and shape your stories, and we want to hear your stories. And this is an exercise, just we want to make sure that you feel supported in taking action. And then we're also going to stick around to have a conversation around clarity on any questions that might come up as well, and specific nuances of the policy. So as you can see, it's an action-packed program. So we're just gonna get right into it. And I think, Christian, you're going to welcome Don Davies.
Yes, I will. So yeah, our first speaker is Don. Don is the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Kingsway. He's long been active in labor justice in BC, and he's now the federal NDP's health critic, which I can imagine nowadays is quite a busy time, quite the role to have. Today he's here to talk about housing affordability and his riding of Vancouver Kingsway. So I will give the floor over to Don.
Well, thank you, CJ and Christian. First of all, I join you as well from the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, and want to thank and honor the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people, by whose grace we gather. And I want to also, first of all, just really express my gratitude on behalf of all of the people I represent to the VTU and to all of you individually and collectively for being such a strong voice for so many people on such a foundational need. The work you do is vital, and I want you to know it's noticed. I had people on my campaign last time who came from the VTU, and we at the federal level, at least I'm familiar with the work you do, and I have a very positive sense whenever I see your contributions or I feel your presence. It's gratifying to me, and it's inspiring to me, and it's actually, it gives me hope when I know that there's people out there who are doing the grassroots work and agitating on the community level for solutions to what I'm about to talk about, and as I think we all know, is one of the core needs of every citizen. I'm really happy to participate in a discussion about this issue of housing. I often joke, I say there's 10,000 issues in politics. There's actually probably 110,000 issues, but some are existential in nature. I don't want to prioritize or put value judgments on them, but I think it's fair to recognize that there's some issues that are foundational. And for instance, I think the climate crisis is existential. I think that's the number one issue facing us collectively as a planet. But I think in our society, I've long felt that housing is the equivalent social, economic, foundational issue facing us as a country and as policymakers. And that's because housing is one of those core human needs from which the ability to meaningfully participate in all other aspects of society is possible. I think that addressing this issue, having acceptable food and nutrition, being physically secure, having access to primary healthcare and housing and clothing. These are the elements that make any kind of real meaningful participation in our democratic polity possible. So I have always had a orientation towards housing as something that is urgent and important. I'm going to focus a little bit on the federal role and policies in this, and I'm going to give you a smattering, a word salad of some general philosophical approaches, some policies, some specifics, and then really throw it open to you. I want to make it plain from the beginning that I come to speak to you, first and foremost, I think, as a member of our community, one whose family is affected by the crisis in affordable housing, as a 30-year East Van resident, who I believe a lot of you look a lot younger than me, but I feel like I've witnessed the development and exacerbation of this crisis over the last 3 decades. It wasn't always this way, by the way. I mean, there's always been homelessness, there's always been housing affordability issues for sure. But to develop to the point where this is such a widespread crisis, I think it didn't just happen. And I remember a time when it was not so acute. And I come as someone seeking solutions and answers together. At the risk of sounding patronizing, I don't have all the answers for sure. I just have my perspective and I can share some information, but I think it's really important that we work together and we innovate and we collaborate and we share and we agitate together, because I think it's going to take all of us working together to solve this problem. In some cases, I speak for policies of the federal NDP, and others are my own thoughts or ideas. Any errors you hear are my own. Where I'm going to start is, I think it's important to identify core beliefs, values, and principles. The longer I'm in politics, the more I realize those are really important to set, because we sometimes assume that they're shared, and they're not necessarily. Christian, you took about 3/4 of my thunder on this. I couldn't possibly say it as well as you did, but I think it's really important to repeat some of these core principles. So, for instance, I believe the core principles that should guide our policy and it must underpin our policy towards housing is that housing is a right. It is not a privilege. I'll come back to that. I think a second core principle is that housing is not just a commodity. One could argue that it ought not to be a commodity at all, but let's just settle on it's not just a commodity, it's a foundational human need. Third, housing is a responsibility of all levels of government, albeit perhaps informed by their respective resources, jurisdictions, and expertise. But I think it's important to recognize it's everybody's responsibility. Fourth, I think housing is a social responsibility of us all. I think that we have to internalize the fact that if our neighbors, if people who live in our community are unhoused or precariously housed or poorly housed, that's our responsibility too. It's not the responsibility of them or government or someone else. It should be a matter of social and community shame that anybody is living month to month or couch surfing or living rough or living insecure. And finally, I want to say that as a core principle and policy, I think the time to act is now. I'm going to wax a little bit philosophical here. One of the most profound realizations that I have come to over the past year from the COVID crisis is that it has shown me that we are capable of profound change quickly. And I don't want to do violence to Naomi Klein's principle, but this idea that when crises come, the right has an instinctive response that they use to deepen the right political philosophy. So whether it's 9/11 deepened the security state, or the 2008 economic crisis, deepened the neoliberal economic approach, I believe this last public health crisis is a crisis tailor-made for progressive progress. Progressive progress, is that kind of a redundancy? For progress from a progressive point of view. And the reason I say that is because I think that what we've seen is that that we have gotten through this because we have strong public institutions. I don't think anybody could imagine getting through the last year without having a strong national government that could provide the CERB benefits, or a strong public healthcare system that could that could make sure that, you know, we don't have to worry about the US style access to healthcare. And the second thing is, I think we realize that we're collectively affected, that what happens down the street affects us. So the other thing I think that's really, it's a lesson that I think the status quo really doesn't want people to cotton on to, is that we can change really fast. I've been a progressive radical all my life. And I've always been told, patted on the head, you know, by these condescending centrists that will say, well, you know, Don, when you grow up, you'll see that change comes slowly. You know, you have to be patient. You know, in the real world, you'll understand what's happening. And I've always instinctively rebelled against that and thought, no, that's not the case. Well, of course, if you're benefiting from the status quo, of course you don't want anything to change. You don't need anything to change. But what we saw this year is, holy mackerel, when we want to fire $2,000 out the door in a hurry, we can do it. We can do it in 6 weeks. So ideas like the guaranteed livable income, you know, which, you know, 2 years ago was a academic issue of concern to people in a very theoretical way. You know, I think if we wanted to, we could implement that in 12 months. I think if we wanted to ban cars, we could say no internal combustion gas cars in 36 months. People would howl, they would bitch, they'd complain, and then they'd do it. So these are the kind of things that we can do. And I think it's the same thing with housing, is it's time to act. And I think we have the opportunity now. Oh, by the way, there's one other aspect I was going to say. As a New Democrat, the top 2 questions I get whenever I open my mouth is, how much is it going to cost? And how are you going to pay for it? I mean, I have to justify, you know, taking a bus downtown, you know, before I have to answer those questions before I do that. You know, in the last 12 months, the federal government spent $280 billion. Our annual federal budget's only $200 billion. We spent an additional $285 billion. And not once have I heard anybody say to Prime Minister Trudeau, where are you getting the money from? How are you going to pay for this? And you know why? Because when we understand that there's a core social need, we act. And I think that's the other window that opens in front of us now, where right now the public is open to this concept of an investment, a significant, large march forward as an investment. And this has happened previously in history. I always point to this idea that after World War II, when veterans came home in housing, the data that I've been advised is that we built 300,000 units of social housing in 36 months. So, you know, there's at certain times in history when there's a public consensus that there's a deep need, we can act, it's an investment and the finances are not a barrier to it, but it's rather an investment that's needed. We can do it. And that's the kind of political time I think we're in right now, but we can't assume that window will stay open. I wanted to say one last core principle, and that is, as a health critic, I have learned there's 2 foundational issues that have been burned into my brain in the last 6 years. One is that prevention is extraordinarily important and we don't spend nearly enough time in healthcare. And the second thing is that the number 1 determinant of health are social determinants. If you wanted to if you wanted to make your population healthy, the first thing you would do is make sure that everybody is adequately housed, everybody has access to a secure and sufficient income, and that people have meaningful community connection. It's not just a moral imperative, it's not just a social justice issue, it's an actual economic and imperative that results in real impacts. So I want to turn now to sort of explore some of these things. In terms of housing being a right, a lot of parties and politicians say this, but I believe it's observed mainly in the breach. I mean, what does it mean? It means that society has an obligation to ensure every single resident who seeks it must get timely access to secure, decent, and affordable housing. To me, it's no different than ensuring universal access to public education or healthcare. If we saw 8-year-olds roaming the street, not in grade 3, we would do something about it. We expect every child between the age of 6 and 18 is in public high school. It's the same thing with healthcare. Everyone who walks into emergency gets help. I think we need to take that concept of housing being a right, and we have to operationalize it just like we do those two aspects, that it's never okay that someone doesn't have access to housing. Number two, I'm just going to say about that as well. I know that it takes some time to build, but I think that's been used as an excuse, that, okay, it takes time. I hear that from liberals in the House all the time. They call me a liberal in a hurry because, I want housing now, and it's like, oh, it's got to take 10 years and 20 years. The thing is, I've been saying this for 30 years and I still don't see the housing. So something's wrong there. In terms of housing not just being a commodity, when we treat housing exclusively as a market-based commodity, there is built into that a guarantee of scarcity and want. If there's one lesson I've learned over the last 30 years watching this, it's that the private sector cannot provide affordable housing. It can't do it. That's not a theory. That's not a belief. That's a fact. That's an empirical economic fact. And frankly, I think it's unfair for us to expect it. I expect the private sector to do what the private sector does, which is to sociopathically maximize their own profit. That's what they do. They're not there. We don't expect them. I don't expect them. And I think it's wrong. I think policies that have tried to involve the private sector in this, I'm not going to say there aren't some programs. I'll talk about that in a second, but I think it's misplaced. If we think that the private sector is going to provide affordable housing, that's a significant policy error. So we need this. One of my favorite phrases that I don't hear very often is we need public enterprise. Private enterprise is good for lots of stuff. It can provide basketballs and running shoes and all sorts of stuff. It cannot provide affordable housing. So we need public enterprise in this. In terms of all levels of government, I see some synergies. Municipalities often have the land base and they have the land banks. Provinces have funding room and they have responsibilities for housing constitutionally, but the federal government has the largest fiscal room to finance and also the ability to create national programs. You're probably aware, I think the last figure I saw was that 70 cents out of every dollar collected in taxes goes to the federal government. I don't need to tell you the history of this, but I'll just briefly mention one of the most serious causes of the current price crisis today was the decision in the 1980s of the Mulroney government to withdraw the second plank of Canada Mortgage and Housing's responsibility to create social housing. You may know that CMHC used to have two main priorities. One was, private mortgage investment, which the banks love. And the second thing is, of course, social housing. When they removed that, and the Liberals promised to restore it, by the way, in 1993 and never did, I think that has paved the way for the absence of the federal government in housing for essentially a generation. 1993, my math is bad, so that's what, 93, 2003, so it's come 28 years. I mean, someone born in 1994 is now an adult and probably has children. That's how long it's been that the federal government has effectively been absent from the housing file. And I think that's a core structural policy position that has to change. So I'm going to get into some specifics that I think we need to do. I know that in the 2019 National Housing Strategy Act, housing was enshrined as a right, but I don't believe that that's been made real. I think there's rights and then there's rights. And there's rights that are enforceable and rights that are actioned and rights that have clear pathways to make real, and there's some that don't. I don't believe that. I think that's more of a statement of principle than an actionable right. Number two, I'm going to get really specific and salty now. If we want affordable housing, build it. We got to build it. I think it's as simple as that. And I mean real affordable housing. I've got to say these nonsensical definitions of affordability. I'll tell you what affordable is. Affordable is 25% of your net income. Maybe 30, I don't know. You guys would know better than me. I'll take your guidance on that, of net income. I don't care if you make 15 grand a year, 30 grand a year, 50 grand or whatever. It's if you're spending more than 25 or 30% of your net income, that's not affordable. And I know that the city played games with this over the past years where they defined affordable as 80% of market. Well, if the market is insane, 80% of insanity is ludicrous. So we need to get real definitions of affordable housing. And I think that the federal government simply has to finance the building of it. Now this is where I think it gets very creative. I personally believe we need the reestablishment of a national co-op housing program. I'd like to see us build 500,000 units of co-op housing in the next 10 years. And by the way, when I say co-op, I mean real co-op, where it is your rent is tied to your income. 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, mixture of socioeconomic data, people aging in place, and where it is guaranteed that you pay 25% of your income. We all know that the co-ops now, because of poor federal policy, have had to transform most of their units to market or near market rent. So while at least there's security of tenure, it has gotten away from the fundamental concept where it should be rent geared to your income. So I think the federal government needs to get back that. And by the way, in my riding, I still think that the happiest, most secure housing places in my riding are still the co-ops. And I've got, I think, 14 of them. There's Trout Lake, there's Caslow Gardens, there's Flesher, there's a whole bunch of them. And that was part of a very successful program in the 70s and 80s that I don't think we necessarily have to reinvent the wheel on that. We should get that going. Now, by the way, I know co-ops aren't for everybody. It's only one piece of it. But I think that's a pragmatic, tried and true method. I would pull all those people out of retirement from the 70s and 80s, the civil servants, and get them together with young planners and say, let's make that happen and modernize it. Let's do it again. I think we need that national homelessness strategy. I would like to see modular housing for homeless everywhere. Like, to me, it's successful. I mean, and by the way, communities kind of complain about it. My feeling is that sort of NIMBYism about it, it's more of a roar than a bite. And I find that I would just ignore that. I think the modular housing should be in every single community on an equal basis, west side, east side, downtown, everywhere, because housing, these are our neighbors and our brothers and sisters and daughters and sons and cousins. We have a right to have housing everywhere. And I think it's successful. I just ask myself why we don't have more of them. I want to speak just briefly about the REIT. Look, federal tax reform is necessary. We have to stop incentivizing the destruction of affordable housing, and we have to incentivize the creation of affordable housing. And when we see federal policy not doing that, and I think that's the REIT program is an example of that, where we're seeing destruction of affordable housing, and investors are being rewarded for it. Something's seriously wrong on the national policy front on that. So I think that has to be completely changed. There are certain federal incentive through the tax system that I think can work. For instance, I've been lobbied over the years by the Real Estate Foundation of British Columbia and Canada, where what they want is, there's capital gains. If you destroy, say, a 1960s walk-up and you build a new rental facility, that can trigger capital gains. So one of the proposals that I've seen is, if the person who wants to demolish their old housing, and if they agree to a number of criteria to replace them with more affordable rental and real affordable, and they want to modernize that, then you can agree in a specific circumstance not to apply the capital gains. And so that would remove a disincentive to doing so and incentivize the creation. Now, I don't think that's a big program. I don't know that there's that many that would do it the right way, but there are some. And I know that there's a 7-point plan, or a 6-point plan, I'm sorry, that was proposed by the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, that calls for, I think, some really specific policies at the federal level. I won't go through them all. You're probably familiar with them, but they represent 6 really well thought out policies that the federal government can pursue. And I find what's interesting about it is it does include things like the implementation of a guaranteed minimum income, a livable income, because I do think that we have to look at this holistically. So we have to build the housing, but we have to understand that the income is part of that as well. So I don't know how long I've been talking for, but that strikes me as a logical place to stop and to invite your commentary and critique and suggestions and thoughts in response. So thank you very much for your kind attention. I look forward to hearing your views.
Thank you so much, Don. That was really wonderful. It's really engaging, and you can see sort of some really full dialogue taking place in the chat. Certainly, please do feel free to engage there, and we're going to have a Q&A after. But I think that really sets the scene really well in the context in which this public hearing is taking place and what specifically we're looking to engage with our members and the people joining us today in terms of taking action. So Sarah and Fraser from the VTU City Hall group have a quick rundown on what this policy means and the specific actions that we can take. So I'd love to welcome Sarah and Fraser to the screen and to sort of take over.
Thanks, CJ. I hope it's quick. I'm going to do my best, but there is a lot of technical things that I'm trying my best not to explain at all. So if you see me going into the details of the policy and so on, you probably would know that I'm going in the wrong direction, and try to pull me back, please. So I'm going to start quickly, and I don't know if I can share my screen. Let me see if I can. Oh yeah, I can. Okay, so I got a bunch of slides for you, and actually maybe I should just send these in the chat so people can follow along if they need to. Sorry, I lost my Zoom. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna ask CJ to do that. Can you send the link that will work?
I'll take care of that.
I got a link that doesn't really give access. Okay, so I'm gonna start here. And as you can see, we have some really pretty slides for you because it's the content is a little thick and heavy on the technical side. So please pay attention to the pretty graphics that we have, and don't feel like it's boring. Okay, so my name is Sarah, and I'm a leader with the Vancouver Tenants Union. I've been organizing with tenants in Vancouver against evictions since 2016. I've been with VTU since 2017. And I really want to thank Don for setting that, context. It was really, really helpful for what I'm going to say. And I'm going to take one thing away from your talk, Don, that I want people to keep in mind when I'm explaining these things, which is the one part that you said: stop incentivizing the destruction of affordable housing and start incentivizing the construction. That's really what this entire thing is about. The market is not going to deliver the housing that we need. And one of the main goals of our team here at VTU and at the City Hall Working Group is to encourage tenants and working class people to participate in the local democracy. Because without our voice at City Hall, it's going to be developers, landlords, property owners who get the say over what policy rules our lives. And the policy that is dominant right now is to continue to rely on the market to do its thing and to actually use our tax dollars to incentivize exactly that kind of destruction of affordability that we're seeing. So I'm hoping that you will take away from this talk that main thing, even if you don't really take away the rest of it. And also, please keep in mind that our goal really is to empower you to have your own voice, to speak at City Hall next Thursday on the proposal that's coming forward, which is a really good proposal. We want to support it. We're not sure if it will pass. We're not sure where the City Council stands on it. But we're hoping that a lot of people show up and say, yes, we really need to do this. And we needed to do this yesterday. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start. And I see some chat notifications. Sorry, I'm not able to see those right now. So let's start with why it matters to protect existing rental buildings. So this is something that the City of Vancouver acknowledges, that one of their three pillars of their approach to affordable housing is to preserve the existing rentals. The reason they acknowledge that is because everybody knows that the existing rentals are the most affordable you can have. If you tear down a rental that was built in the 60s that rents for, I don't know, $800 or $1,000, I'll show you some numbers further down, and build a new rental, the new rental is not going to be that cheap, obviously. It's probably going to start from a level that is way inaccessible to the people who were living there previously. So we need to reject this idea that replacing one rental with another, this quantitative look at like the number of rentals that we have. And this is something the city relies upon a lot. So, they just look at the number that is created, number of units that are created, but not really looking at the affordability. Okay, I'll show you some charts about that further down. So we need to preserve the existing rentals because they're very affordable, and also because they are protection for the tenants who live in them. If we had proper protection, eviction protection, especially demo eviction, which is what we're talking about here. Demo eviction means getting evicted because your building is being demolished. We don't have those things. There are measures that city can have, that the province can put in place to protect tenants against these demolitions, but we don't have them. One of them would be, for instance, having right to return at the same or similar rent to the new unit, or providing temporary accommodation. These are things, for instance, that the city of Burnaby is doing right now, but we haven't been able to get Vancouver to do it, or provincially, which would be the best. So if we had those things, then maybe the effect of tearing down these rentals would actually be a little lessened, and we will lose less affordability, because if people can come back on the same rent, then obviously the new unit will be more affordable. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about this specific thing that we're going into. We're talking here about something called, if you look at the city report, which it's included here for the Thursday proposal, there's something called RHSODP, which is the Rental Housing Stock Official Development Plan. This is a bylaw that has a lot of things in it about basically what kind of development is allowed when it comes to existing rental housing. One of the main things that is included in here is something called 1-for-1 replacement of rentals. All that this means is that if you want to tear down a building and build a new building, if that building includes a number of rentals, let's say you tear down a walk-up that has, like, let's say 8 units of rentals in it, you can build whatever you want. I mean, whatever you want within the other frameworks that are defined, but you have to replace those 8 units. So that's 1-for-1 replacement. You tear down 8, you have to build 8. You can build condos for the rest of the building, but those 8 needs to be preserved. Okay, so this is, as you can imagine, this is a bare minimum protection. There's nothing about affordability here. It's just, let's not lose the rentals. Let's not have them be replaced by condos. That's really what this is about. And as you can see, the number here, only 77% of all of our purpose-built rentals. So with purpose-built rental, we're talking about rental buildings, apartment buildings, not, for instance, houses that are rented or condos that are rented. Only 77% of those have this kind of protection right now. The rest of them don't have it, which means they can be torn down and replaced by condos, and they are being torn out and replaced by condos, or with whatever commercial or other kinds of uses. Okay, so what are these? I'm not going to go over all of the points, so let's just go to the next thing, that is about what are the things that are excluded. So 23% are excluded. What are they? Most of these are rentals that are along major arterials in the city, and they are in what's called commercial zone. So you can imagine there's, I live close to East Hastings. There's a lot on East Hastings. When you go down, there's like these shops, and then on top of them, there are some rentals. Or sometimes it's just the full rental building that's sitting right on a major street. Like there's a lot along West Broadway or Kingsway, which Don was talking about. So why these rentals are not protected. And that's, those are the places that you see a lot of development activity as well. These are commercially zoned according to the city. So they just pretend like there are no rentals here because this is a commercial, not residential zone. And that's the origin of this exclusion, is that they just assume, not that they assume, but they were like, oh, there aren't enough rentals to be worth protecting in those zones. So we're just not going to do it. But really there is an intention here as well, which is that they want to encourage development along arterials. These are places that have better access to transit. They are, from development perspective, they are more valuable. If you want to build a luxury condo right next to the coming SkyTrain station that goes to UBC, obviously that will sell for a lot more if it's right on, I don't know, it's with very good access. I mean, also, I don't know who would really want to live right on West Broadway. It's not really like, it's not traditionally desired, but let's leave that aside. It's just what's being done right now. I'll give you an example of this kind of development, this kind of approach to development. If you look, for instance, to New Westminster, if you go to this newest SkyTrain, when you get out of the SkyTrain, there's all this like new development all around. There's all the new condos, right? So this is what they call transit-oriented development. So we want to develop closer to the transit when the new developments are there. But if you go uptown in New West, if you keep walking up the hill, there's all these older rentals. They're a lot cheaper. They are rentals and they're not condos. And poorer people, working class people, live in those rentals. They don't live in the condos downtown. So what is the sense in this? Well, the sense is that rich people get to live closer to transit and poor people further and further away from transit, from the city core, and also just being pushed out into the suburbs altogether. So that's the trend that we're seeing with this model of development that the city is encouraging, which is, by the way, not limited to the city of Vancouver. Okay, so so that's kind of the underlying, I guess, ideology behind not protecting these rentals. And what we're talking about today is only about 4% of these 23%. So the 23% are not protected. There's a proposal coming to City Council that asks whether we should protect 4% of them that are in one particular commercial zone that's called C2. So these 4%, it looks like a small number, but it's actually 3,000 rental units. And I'll tell you one thing about these rental units. You can probably think for yourself, like the rentals along East Hastings that I just mentioned, they are very cheap. There are people living there who are probably very low income. They're probably very long-term tenants. Typically they're not desired places for living, like on top of a shop on East Hastings. It's not as preferred as, in a protected, I guess, purpose-built rental in Kitsilano. So they're a lot cheaper, and the people who live in them are a lot more vulnerable. And so that means that when they get evicted, they have not as much options. A lot of people, I guess, end up in SROs as a last resort housing in the single room occupancy hotels in downtown East Side. Okay, so this is a map of where the zoning that I was talking about is in the city. So these are areas. This is the 4%, by the way. This is not the entirety of the commercial zones that are excluded, but it's 4%. And as you can see, there's a lot. This is Kingsway. This is Fraser, Maine, and this is Nanaimo, East Hastings over here. So all along the major arterials. This is, by the way, from the city report for Thursday, for the proposal on Thursday that we will share with you. I have some slides here about transit-oriented development, but I'm not going to get into because I think I explained the general idea. New Westminster is an example. So I just say one thing about this, which is that what really bothers me is that this is presented as a solution to a lot of different things like climate change. I want us to find a way to reject this idea that in order to do something about climate change, we need to basically what this kind of policy is doing, which is get rid of poor people, push them out of the city core. right? This is what's happening under the disguise of building a climate friendly or I guess walkable neighborhood, access to transit and so on. Yeah, that's all great, but who is it for? It's just for people who can afford those condos, and it's usually for you know, professionals living in urban areas and so on. It's not for working class people who do, you know, blue collar jobs and so on. Okay, I'll give you one one case that will really make all of this really concrete. There was a building on East Hastings 3532, East Hastings, close to where I live, and there were tenants getting evicted from this. This is from 2019. The rents in this building will blow your mind. There were 8 units, 1 and 2 bedrooms. The two bedrooms were 800, so that was the expensive one. And the 1 bedrooms were 500 to 600. It was a small community, everybody knew each other, lived in the building. Of course, 8 units, not that big. So there was a proposal to tear this down and replace it with a new rental. And the city was actually incentivizing this new rental because they didn't want the rental, obviously, they didn't want the rental to be replaced by a condo, and the developer had that option because of this loophole in the policy. They had the option of building condos, so the city was like, we'll give you all these tax breaks and something on top of it, so you build rentals. But what are these rentals that are being built? Well, the proposal was for a bachelor unit to start from 1,500 and a 1 bedroom from 1,800. Now this is, we're talking East Hastings all the way past or I guess past the PNE, yeah. So it's going further closer to Burnaby, I guess. It's not the west side. It's not a highly desired location. It's a pretty working class community there. Now, this was interesting. I was representing these tenants at the city council, so I followed the details of the discussion very closely. And one thing that was really interesting to me was that the council, when they learned about the tenants who live in these buildings, they wanted them to be able to come back at the same rent to the new units. So they asked the developer, can we have 8 units set aside? So the building has like 30, 40 new units. We just want 8 units set aside for the current tenants to come back and pay something similar to what they're paying, maybe plus annual increase on their rents. But that was not possible. Developer said that will make our project financially not viable. So, okay, and then council was like, okay, what can we do? Approve it. Why? Because they said, well, developer can just go ahead and build a condo and we will lose rentals. But guess what? The city cannot allow that to happen, and then developer will have to build rentals, and they will have to negotiate with the city on the affordability and on protecting tenants. So that's what this proposal is about. It's about removing that option of tearing down rentals, replacing them by condos, and that will probably have some marginal effect on the affordability of the new rentals that will be built as well, or that's the hope. I'll show this chart from the city report. It shows what has been lost in these unprotected areas. Only C2, this is only about the 4%. And what has been gained. So they boast a lot about what's been gained in terms of the number of rental units. But think about it this way. This is 1,068 units that have been lost in the last 10 years. These are the units that I was describing to you. These are super affordable units with really low income families living in them. And where did these people go? They got evicted. Where did they go? There's no option for them, right? They probably didn't stay in the city. They probably moved to the suburbs. Maybe they lived in with their families or in SROs or what have you. And the new ones though are the kinds that I just described to you, the ones that rent a bachelor at a 1,500 level. So this is one class of people being replaced by another, essentially, and that's what we call gentrification. We need to stop the loss of these units. That's really important, and just replacing them by new units does not count. Okay, so what's happening on Thursday, March 11th? There's a public hearing. Public hearing means the city sets aside time to hear from the public on a particular proposal. You can sign up to speak. Fraser is going to talk to you about that. I encourage everybody to please sign up to speak. Don't be intimidated by any of the technical aspects of this. I think we all get the main principle here, which is that we need to protect working class tenants. We need to protect the affordability that we have, because we can't, in the current climate at least, we can't easily build new rentals at this level of affordability. So what's the sense in getting rid of them and allowing them to be torn down? Okay, so what else do I need to tell you about this part? Yes, so essentially 23% are unprotected. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Right, oh, one thing. So what is the argument for not protecting or against protecting these rentals? What one thing that you will see both in the city report and probably if you tune into the public hearing and speak, you will see that the main issue for property owners, not for tenants, is their property values. So if the city puts in this protection for rentals along arterials of the 4%, the property values of the people who own the properties are going to go down. And the city report goes on and on about how bad this is and how much exactly will be lost in value overall. We think that's a great thing. We think that's kind of like the point, really. Like, the property values are way out of control. There is no point for the city to be protecting them to stay at this level. They need to come down. This is exactly the kind of policy that we need to put in place to dampen this out of control market. And that will actually help with the affordability levels, but the city doesn't want to upset property owners. So what can you do? Well, that's where exactly you need to have tenants showing up. So I'll show you on that point. I'll show you this chart. The city did a survey on this issue on whether or not they should protect rentals along arterials. And the one on the left side are from the renters. They asked in the survey, are you a renter or a property owner? So 75% of renters agree or strongly agree. 92% of property owners disagree or strongly disagree. Okay, so this is clearly coming down to, who's benefiting from what, right? There's no middle ground here. It's about, so a class of people benefiting from the housing crisis and another class just losing their access to their basic need. So I highly encourage the 13 to 16 pages of this report. I hope I made it a little exciting for you so it doesn't look too dull. Yeah, the link will be shared. It's, as you can see, this is about class war. Okay, so I'll go back up to see if there was anything that oh yeah, I have some points here about, progress. Should we stop progress? Should we stop development altogether? I hope you're understanding by now that that's not what I'm trying to say, but that's something that we can discuss in the Q&A. I don't want to go on for too long about it. And on that note, I'll pass it on to Fraser to talk about how to sign up.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. That was really informative. And I think just one extra thing that I wanted to add on to that with folks' opinions, comparing it between property owners and renters. I think it's also important. There was a third section that was specifically on homeowners. And while a majority of homeowners also still thought that this shouldn't be extended, there was like a significant amount, probably like over a third of homeowners saying that they agreed or strongly agreed with the extending these protections. So I think it's like important to really frame like what we're actually talking about here when we're talking about that fight. And it seems to be that it's really against property developers, right? And property owners of large areas that, so we're not necessarily talking about kind of like the small homeowner that is going to be, screwed over or anything by those decreasing values. Like a lot of those folks share our goals and share our aims. So I think we really need to take a look at, where's that pressure coming from in our society and do we want to do that? So I'm going to share my screen and basically I'm going to try and make mine super quick. I'm pretty much just letting people know about how to sign up for the public hearing that is happening next week on March 11th at 6 p.m. And if you're wondering, if you've been listening to this and you think this is great, but you're wondering whether or not you should sign up and whether or not you should speak at the public hearing, speak at the public hearing. Definitely sign up. It is a really, really good thing to do. And I think that not only practically, because it's really important for council to hear about this so that it will have a greater likelihood of passing. But I also think with how Dawn was talking about, taking a look at our principles in terms of how we do politics and how we want to live in a community. And I think just on its most basic principle, we should be making sure that have a system in which we can engage with our elected officials and that we can have our voices heard and have our opinions heard. So I'll show you how to do this. So hopefully my screen is being shared right now. Is that right? Cool. So this public hearing link is, I believe, in the Facebook group as well as it's sent out in the email. Maybe someone can post that to the Zoom chat as well, just so that it's really easily accessible for folks. So this is a public hearing, so it's not speaking on a city council motion. One of the nice things about that is it means that you're guaranteed to speak. So I know for folks who are involved in our REITs motion, there's a lot of disappointment about the fact that they cut off the speaker list quite early. Here, they're not going to do that, which is really nice. The other nice thing about it is that it's at a specific time. So we know when the meeting is going to start and when they're going to start taking people, which will be at 6 p.m. So it's quite easy to fill out here. I think I'm just on the second page here. Okay, let's see here. Oh, sorry. This is yeah, sorry, my link is a little bit broken here, I think. Let's see if that, sorry about that, folks. I'm just gonna pull that up here. So I think I'm just gonna stop screen sharing for a sec.
CJ put the link in the chat as well.
Perfect. I will just use that. Yeah, sorry about that, folks. I think I just signed up myself, which meant that it was a little bit laggy. Perfect. Okay. So, right. Okay. So in terms of signing up, when you click on that link, you're going to be followed. Your page is going to come to here. You want to take a look at number 2, extension of rental housing stock, official development plan to require rental replacements in C2. So that's what we've just been talking about. So you want to click support that motion. Then when you click next, it's going to ask you about some information. So you can fill in your full name, your email, and your phone number, because that's what they're actually going to be calling you for in order to call into that public hearing. Finally, in terms of the organization you represent, we ask that you actually just don't put Vancouver Tenants Union. I think it's in general more persuasive and more accurate to talk about your personal experiences with housing. And yeah, you don't have to be a resident of the city of Vancouver. I believe that, we want a variety of different perspectives talking at this public hearing. So I think it's important for us to talk about the larger kind of fight for housing. So definitely don't let that deter you from speaking. And then once you click send your request to speak, you should get an email, a confirmation email about that sign up, and then more instructions on how to do that. And yeah, I'd really like to reiterate, if this is a new subject to you, if C2 is something that you're still kind of wrapping your head around and all that kind of stuff, still definitely apply to sign up, because what's really going to be the thing that is most persuasive and that makes the biggest impact is people's personal stories about the housing affordability crisis and the difficulties and struggles of finding housing in Vancouver, which I think is just super tied to what this motion is all about and what this public hearing is all about. Thanks very much for listening. I think I'll pass it back to CJ to go to the next part of our presentation.
Thanks so much, Fraser. It's almost like we practice this, because what you're talking about is hearing people's stories and how much they matter. And we really wanted to make space for that in this discussion today. This has been tremendously engaging and really informational and really helpful. I know I've learned a lot as sort of a newish volunteer, and you continue to learn. And we did receive some comments and actually a really beautiful and thoughtful letter from a tenant who had been sort of kind of forced out of Vancouver as a result of exactly this. And so we will be sharing that after this session, but we did have a speaker with us today. So the anonymous letter, you'll receive the link to read the anonymous letter. I think it is on and really brings forward a lot of what we talked about today, but we do have someone who's able to join us and willing to share her story. So I would invite Liz to sort of share with us for a few minutes, tell us her story. Liz.
Hi. Thank you. And thank you for everybody prior to, hi Dawn. It's been really informative. And yeah, so I'm going to talk about a sort of a case study, I guess. And I should say, so it's not exactly my story, although I'm pretty connected to it because it's about my mom's building. And it actually involves a building that I did used to live in. But yeah, so it's just, we've gone through this process, as I think it was probably mentioned that, you know, a similar motion has come up before where we tried to get this extension of the official development housing stock to C2. And when that happened, I worked with this building because they are one of those buildings, that sort of smallish 4%, that was involved. So this is about a little building it's in Kitts, actually. It's a little tiny section of what is called an arterial, which is a portion of U Street, the one that runs right down to Kitts Beach. It just sort of dead ends if you head north. And many of you will probably know it because it's got, you know, there's a number of restaurants and bars and that kind of thing. And so because of that, it is zoned C2. It's a really small portion. So in that little section, there are a number of very old buildings. This is incredibly old housing stock, I think sort of early, you know, 1900s. And that are pretty amazing buildings. A lot of them haven't been maintained that well, which pertains to the building that I'm talking about, my mom's building. But they were so well built that they're pretty excellent types of housing stock. But of course, because of where they are right there on U Street, it's, you know, they're really considered valuable, right? This is just like right at Kitts Beach. So they're constantly under threat. So the building that my mom lives in is similar to the one that Sarah was talking about, I think on Hastings. It's a small walk-up building. There are 9 units of housing plus 2 sort of side units. There's like 2 little townhouses that are attached to it. And this building has been, you know, we've been told, like I moved into this building myself, 17 or 18 years ago. And at that time, I was told that this is imminently going to be sold, like at any point. And in fact, I was told when I moved in that we didn't ask for repairs. Like the building manager who also lived in the building said, like, we really try to sort of fly under the radar. So it's kind of, you know, it is as is. You know, so you've got to live with it. It's pretty rustic, not going to lie, it's rustic. But it's big and solid and quiet. Unlike, I don't know if you can hear the noise coming from above me. I hope you can't because the building I'm in now is not very noise proof. But anyway, so when I just want to give a little tiny bit of this background. When I moved into that building, it was a godsend then. I was a grad student, so, you know, not rolling in cash. I was in a relationship that I was trying to get out of, but felt I couldn't because of housing. But eventually had to. And when I started looking at the time, it was, I can't, you know, I mean, many of you will know, we all know how harrowing, it was just harrowing, right? It was gutting because I couldn't find anything that I could afford. And when this place came up, my friend and I who had been looking, we almost didn't go look at it because the rent seemed so reasonable given like where it was located. We thought this is going to be terrible because we had seen some terrible places. So we went and we looked at it, and it was just like, it kind of felt like a bit life-saving because it was an amazing little building. The reason that the rent was so low is because, again, you know, not maintained that well, fairly old, pretty rustic, but it was also noisy because of where it was. So we were told all these things, like, this is basically, you know, discounted rate rental because it's on a busy street and, you know, it's old, which is exactly the kind of housing that I needed. And like, this housing was, like I said, it was just, I don't know, it felt like it saved my life. I spent my next 3 or 4 years finishing my grad studies there. It was, yeah, it was secure. It was pretty good housing. When I moved, it was because my mom retired and she was moving out to BC and she needed affordable housing. And I had actually finally got a job, like finished grad school. And I was actually moving out of province. So she moved in. And so it's continued to be this sort of like miracle housing because my mom, subsequent to that, has had 3 strokes over the past, like, the last sort of 6-ish years. And that building it's a community. It's like the most amazing community sort of center. It like literally functions that way. The people who live in this unit, they span a significant age range. So you have like this multi-generational, there's like young people who live there. About half of them are seniors. Everybody is pretty much low income. You've got a number of seniors who are on pensions. You've got people who don't have pensions, so they're living on GIS. So really low income people. And you have a series of people who have been, like, I think one of the people has been living there for 25 years. So you can imagine what the rents are. The rents are low. They probably range, the last I checked, from somewhere around $700 to now the newer ones, like when people move out, are getting charged about $1,400. So it's a place, yeah, where people, like working people and students, can live. One of the younger people who works there, lives there, she works 3 different jobs to be able to pay her like $1,100 rent, which is hard, but she's terrified because $1,100 is still, you know, immeasurably better than she's going to find anywhere else. So what happened was about a year and a half ago, we were told that the building was up for sale and under development. So the owner had put in a development application, even though they were selling the building, which was really, this kind of got us at BTU very sort of like activated, because we were like, how is this happening? Like, how can you apply for an application to develop that you have no intention to pursue? Which it also sent the city kind of, they didn't know what to do, because we started pushing back on that because it was very clear they were admitting that they didn't want to develop it. So we were like, well, there's no good faith to develop, so why are we initiating this process? Because at this point, it triggered things like the tenant relocation policy, protection policy. And so we pushed on that, and the city was also like you could tell that they were sort of panicking a bit, like the various people we were dealing with. But in the end, they concluded that like it's fine. The owners could do whatever they want. So the residents were living under threat of this development, of course, because there is no protection. That if they had lived, and I think for people who might be considering speaking to City Hall, one thing I think just to think about is it's kind of crazy that if these people, like any of the people living in C2 zoning, but in this particular case, if they lived just like, you know, one unit behind, like one building behind where they're living now, they'd be protected, right? Because the ODP would apply to them. But just because they're unlucky enough to live like on this particular street and not, you know, 2 houses behind it or even a house behind it, they have no protection. So I think that's kind of crazy, and that's something that I always think about when I'm engaging with City Hall. It just seems sort of arbitrary in that sense. So the development was going through, so there was lots of backing and forthing with the city. The tenants got mobilized with the help of BTU. They submitted, you know, they made a submission, told their stories. Many of them spoke at City Hall. One thing that was really interesting that we learned is, as we're going through this process and putting a lot of effort into making these submissions and doing, you know, all of the things, is I started questioning one of the like the main planners that we were dealing with, is like, well, what are the, like, how do you make this decision? And in effect, what they told us was actually they don't deny any application unless there's a technical reason for it. So even though there was this like opportunity for us to make these submissions and people were putting their like so much energy, and it was, you can imagine, like a really emotional and terrifying time for these people, and they're being very vulnerable, right? They're telling, you know, officials, they're going to City Hall, they're saying like, I make, you know, like $1,600 a month on my pension, like I cannot find housing anywhere, you know, all of these things. They all have pets also, by the way. Only to find out that really this sort of felt like we were eventually told, after really pushing, that this was like they couldn't really act on any of this. So that's something that has really been scarring, because it, you know, it was a lot of effort. Anyway, so that it continued apace. The development was approved, and what ended up happening was exactly what the owner said, is that they actually didn't have any intention of pursuing the development. So what we think that they were doing was that they were using this process in order to be able to enhance the value, because they are still trying to sell the building. The building has been for sale for now like the last 2 years. But now they have this piece of paper that they can point to say, this you can develop. Like, here is our approved application. So yeah, so now the tenants there are just basically waiting for like the next owner to come along and develop the building. So yeah, that's kind of the story of this building.
Liz, thank you so much for explaining that. I think we saw in the comments that someone was like, yeah, we want to hear these stories and the risks, and we want to, I think those are the most powerful things, and that's a huge part of the City Hall. So just thank you for taking the time for being here.
No problem. The only actually one other little quick thing I sort of forgot to mention is that the city kept coming back to us, you know, with the tenant relocation protection policy, saying like, oh, well, they will have that. But every time we said to them, like, can you show us how this will work? Because, you know, this person is paying, you know, $800 in rent. Like, how are you going to, you know, fulfill this? And they had nothing. Like, just there was nothing, because you can't, like, you cannot right now meet that. You can't meet what is required of the TRPP. So you will, I think, hear that. And maybe, and Sarah, like, it's been a while, I've been sort of out of the loop with COVID and work, it's been nuts. So maybe there's been changes. But at that point, we were asking, you know, how are you going to do this? And can you show us accessible examples? And they had none. And we had examples of people who supposedly were subject to the TRPP who ended up in SROs. And the city, the planners that we were dealing with, like when they came, because we had meetings, they had no idea. Like, you could tell, like, they didn't actually know what was happening. So there didn't seem to be like any tracking of the success of the TRPP. And there was absolutely no, like, they just couldn't give us any explanation of how you were going to find, you know, 8 units of housing between like $800 and $1,100 for this group of people anywhere in Vancouver. So yeah. Oh, and I know we're all in a hurry to say, but I just want to actually quickly talk about the terror that they're living in too, is because there's such a tight knit community. I mentioned my mom has had 3 strokes, which for me is insane, because I have these people who constantly check in on my mom, and the community is so strong and intergenerational there that the coffee shop across the street from where that building is, they take my mom's mail deliveries. They bring her food all the time. They bring her deliveries. It's just, that little section is just, it's such a tight knit community, and they're all living in like complete terror, because they know that even if the TRPP were to work for them, they're going to be flung to all like parts of the city. Okay, yeah. Now I'm done. Sorry.
No, thank you.
I just wanted to come in and say, sorry, CJ, to cut in. Thanks so much, Liz. That's so heartfelt. I remember going through all of this, and this was 2019. It was such a long time. It feels like such a long time ago, but it wasn't really. And I remember your mom speaking at city council, and everyone was like, how did this happen that this lady made it to city council to even speak? Because this is like really unheard of. There's so many barriers to actually get there and learn about these policies, and you've mastered them all, you know, like we were talking about TRPP and the ODP and the so on and so forth. Like most people don't even know what those things are, but you've mastered them all, and we've, you know, everybody in the building organized and mobilized and got through, jumped through all the hoops, but still, like we were essentially told, City Hall doesn't make any decisions. We'll just let developers do whatever they want. And it doesn't have to be that way. That's not right. Like, it's not like it's written in stone that they have to just grant permission for development to everything. I just wanted to say the TRPP that Liz is referring to is what the city relies on to say, oh, we're doing something for evicted tenants. It's the relocation, tenant relocation policy. So they claim that developer has to relocate the tenants to somewhere that is comparable in rent, yada, yada. In actuality, that never happens because there isn't a place to move anyone to, and the city admits that and say there is no place, so we can't do anything. So we let the developer off the hook. And that keeps happening again and again. Thanks for sharing, Liz. That was really
Yeah, no, thank you for listening.
And that point of the community, like the communities that are formed, I know we saw some of that in the comments, and that comes across really clearly in the letter as well. So that's like a really important part of this. I did just want to bring Fraser back to clarify a couple of things. So Fraser, I'm just going to hand it over to you before we bring Christian back to facilitate the Q&A for the last 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, thanks, CJ. So yeah, just wanted to mention a couple of things here. I sort of briefly mentioned this when I had spoken, but I want to make sure that we don't get this missed. So what happens after you sign up? So you are going to get an email that will tell you that you have confirmed to sign up, and it will also give you a speaker number. So I personally have actually not spoken in a public hearing before, but I assume that this is quite similar. And panel, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe it's very similar to signing up for a city council motion, which is that you will get a number, which is your number of what order you'll be speaking in. So that'll sort of tell if you're right at the beginning. You know, if you have a lower number, it'll be right at 6. If you have a higher number, it might be a few minutes afterwards. But this is really important, as Will actually brought up in the comment section. Thanks to that, Will. Is that even signing up, even if you don't actually speak, is really important, because it shows that we actually have the tally, that we actually have public support for this. So city council members will go through and take a look, or city staff members will go through and see how many people said that they supported this, how many people said that they were against this. And even if not everybody actually ends up talking, that tally itself is important. So I'd really encourage you right now, even if you're not sure if you're free or available on that day, sign up, because even doing that is showing and voicing your support. And I believe that there was one. Oh, right, yes. So if you still don't feel comfortable with speaking, but you still want to have your voice heard and your opinions heard, make sure there's actually an alternative to that, which is that you can send in written comments to the staff as well. So Sarah's posted a link on that. It's a couple comments up now. Maybe I'll just repost that in the chat. But basically quite a similar page as before. Yeah, great, thanks, Sarah. Similar pages before. You know what? I'll even share my screen really briefly to show you this. So public hearing correspondence, basically just like an email template. So putting in your subject. So speaking, you can say like in support of C2 extensions / affordable housing protections. So make sure that you get your the side that you're on and the subject in there. Of course, it's going to give you a position for support or oppose. And then you can write your comments in there as well, and it's going to ask you for the same information as before. If you want to do that via Word instead, you can also attach a document here. I would caution folks, if you're typing in the comments section, this will not save. So if you lose anything, or if you accidentally close this tab, then all of your stuff will be deleted. So folks might want to do that on Word first and then copy paste that in, or upload the Word document itself here, and then you can send your comments. And I believe that's it. Maybe if there's any questions, they can be answered in the Q&A about signing up, or you can ask them in the comment thread as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Fraser. I just
Sorry,
seen.
there's a question in the chat that I was trying to answer about what the deadline is for signing up. This is a public hearing. If this was all in person, by the way, you could like go to the city hall. That's how we did it back in the day before COVID. Between 5:30 to 6, you can just show up and write your name down and request to speak. So the deadline is like right up to the time of the public hearing. But if the form closes and you can't sign up, there's an alternative email address you can send a request to. Try to do it earlier, obviously, than later. But like, let's consider it about an hour before 6 for the form or something like that. But there's still the alternative is the email, as long as you request before 6 on Thursday.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So we're gonna move to a Q&A, and if you have any questions about what you might want to say at the public hearing, or sharing your story and things like that, we are going to have a specific time for that right after this Q&A, where we're going to go into some breakout rooms and we'll be able to have some like peer support for preparing for the public hearing. But anything other than that, if you have any questions, this is the time. So I think if you have questions for really any of our speakers, for Dawn, for Sarah, Liz, if you're comfortable answering questions about your story and you're still around.
Mentally, but if there's that case, I may be able to answer.
Okay.
Story.
That sounds good. So yeah, any general questions for our speakers? You can either put your question in the chat, or you can simply type list into the chat, and we know that means that you want to ask a speaker a question, and we can call on you. And then once we call on you, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. So I don't think we have any built up in the chat right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, CJ, any questions? But no, okay, yeah. So if there's any questions, please feel free to put your name in the chat there.
It was a very self-sustaining chat conversation.
Yeah.
Answering each other it was really lovely to see.
Yeah, it's sort of like a Q&A went through the
yeah, I did.
Went throughout.
And so if we had, okay, here we go. Okay, Theo has a question. Theo, please go ahead.
I have a question for Dawn, actually. Do you know what the status of the current federal government's position on affordable housing is, what they're doing about it, if they've talked about putting like actual real funding into building affordable housing? I'm pretty sure they haven't, but like, what do they say?
Well, to be frank, all we've really heard is our words. There was, government has this propensity to re-announce and re-announce and re-announce, and it almost seems to me like they got to be double checked to make sure they're not re-announcing something they already announced. But the federal Liberals back in 2015 said that they were going to invest, I think it was $40 billion over 10 years. But here we are 6 years in, and I haven't seen the housing. I don't know if any of you have. I mean, you see little tiny slivers here, but I haven't seen that. At the time, a lot of that money was backloaded, and a lot of it was actually double counted, and a lot of it was tied to equivalent provincial matching. So it was, I think, quite a political sleight of hand. I mean, if they made it seem like $40 billion of federal money was going to be poured into Canadian housing over 10 years. Not only is that not the case, but I think again, as we're 60% through that time period, we're not seeing it. Jenny Kwan is our housing critic, and she's pretty ferocious in the House of Commons. And I've heard her go at housing and demand to see where it was. Where is the housing? Like, tell us where it is. I've actually asked too. I know some of my colleagues have actually put questions on the order paper asking for specific addresses of where federal funding has gone into their ridings. And so far, the 3 MPs that I know have done it in our caucus have gotten back zero, like it's zero. So to me, it's a lot of spin, and it was meant to I think take some political heat off the issue and make it seem like the government was paying attention, but it hasn't resulted in tangible effects on the ground. By the way, it's one thing I think should be forbidden, which is governments making announcements for spending money beyond their term. Like my joke is I've said to Jagmeet saying we should promise to spend $1 trillion over the next 1,000 years. Like, we will not be underspent. Like, I mean, that's just ludicrous to say that. A government should have the ability to say what they're going to spend in their 4-year term and then to be held accountable. But when they say I'm going to spend a blank amount of money in 2032, I mean, they can say anything they want. And so that's really what's happened, is there has not been meaningful, it's not been a meaningful backing up of that political pledge.
Thank you.
I also just posted this link in the chat about the national housing strategy that they announced a few years ago. It's, yeah, just echoing what Don said, but if you want to read up, that's something we wrote way back. There is, oh, sorry, there's a question to chat that I thought I could up and answer. Thor, that's a very good question. Thor is asking, like, what do I say without just echoing the same things? And if I don't have a personal connection to a C2 building, what do I talk about? So that's really like the point that we're trying to drive home here, is that it's not just about people who are directly experiencing the effects of these policies. It's really about what's happening in the city because of the bad policies of different levels of government, and who did they support and who they throw in the bus, essentially. And I'm sure all of us have some experience with lack of affordability in the city, so all of that will be relevant. And the other thing is that there's some principles, like Don was talking about at the beginning, that it's about the principles. What are the principles that we want our city government, which runs on public tax dollars and is supposed to be representing us? What are the principles that we want them to embody in their decision making? And this is about that. And also, don't worry about sounding repetitive or saying the same things over and over. It is important to keep saying, keep stating these principles, that housing is a human right, that we need to stop incentivizing the destruction of affordable housing and incentivize the construction of them. So those are all things that are important to keep telling these elected officials, just so to show that there is public support for these positions.
And I think Tanya summed it up well. She had a comment in the chat a little bit ago that just said that everyone within the city limits deserves the same protections. I don't think it matters whether you live on Kingsway or on 41st or like a residential street. Everyone deserves the same security of housing. Awesome. Okay. I don't think we have any other questions right now. Any final questions before we move on to the next section? Give a quick second. Okay. So if that is the case, I will pass over to CJ, who's just going to explain what we're going to do. Oh, here we go. Sorry, we had one other question. What else can we do beyond this? That is a good question. I mean, I'm going to give a cheap plug here and say join the VTU City Hall Working Group. But I mean, personally, though, I think truly because this question ultimately, there's a lot of technical things that are being talked about here, about, C2 zoning and stuff and policy and stuff. But truly, I believe that the solution to this is organizing ourselves. And without us having collective strength, solutions aren't going to come. We need to find them ourselves and push for them ourselves. And so I do think that is the solution to the crisis in general. I don't know if any of the other facilitators here or any of the other speakers want to answer that question of what do we, regardless of what happens at the public hearing, where do we go from here? Organize
your building, organize your neighborhood, build a community. We need all the rental buildings to be like what Liz was talking about with her mom's building. Everyone has a community around them, and we need to get to know each other and support each other and show up to City Hall. This is just one example of something that's happening that we're bringing to you, but really tune in and see what decisions they're making on your behalf and in your name. So that's kind of the moral takeaway, I guess.
Okay, I see Dawn's just having to head out. So thank you so much for coming and speaking, Dawn. We really appreciated it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And contact my office if there's anything that anybody wants to chat about. I'd be happy to hear your views and get your guidance on this or any other issue. Thank you very much and good luck at City Hall.
Great. Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
So yeah, so CJ, I'll put it over to you to sort of explain how the next section of this is going to go.
Perfect. Thanks. So just thank you so much to everyone who has come out. What we wanted to do with this session is share as much information as possible, but also make some time and some space to support anyone who might want to engage at City Hall or who might want to spend a little bit more time chatting. So the plan for now until such a time, probably another half hour if there's sort of the capacity, and stay if you want, but what we're going to do is split off into breakout rooms and sort of talk about what it's like to prepare for speaking at a public hearing or at City Hall. Some of us have done it, I have not yet, and so we're going to do that. So we're going to break off into the great question. We're going to break off into breakout rooms, and I just want you to know that in your breakout rooms, what happens in the breakout rooms are not recorded. We're actually going to end the recording now, even if we didn't. You can't record breakout rooms. So we're going to do that. We're just going to randomly assign you, and just note that if you want to stay in the main room and talk to Sarah about policy or the working group, there'll be a few of us, some policy monks, want to hang out here for a little bit, you can do that as well. So you might be assigned to a breakout room, but you don't have to accept and join that breakout room. You can just stay in the main room as well. So if everyone who wants to stick around can do that, I will start setting up the breakout rooms. And yes, I will actually, what I'll do first is stop the recording.